All right, hey everybody. So today we're going to go ahead and go over rendering in Fusion 360 and how you can create some really cool visuals of your product. So I'm going to start from this blank file right here. And so this is the camping lantern that I designed for this project. So let's take a quick look at my Instructable, some of the renders and tools that I used to create the visuals on this, and then let's go ahead and make some. So we're seeing some renderings there at the beginning, and as we come down, here's another good example of some colorways that I wanted to offer this in. We're seeing a GIF here of, this would be 5 separate renderings that I did inside of Fusion and then took into Photoshop to make a GIF. I'm going to show you how to do that in a little bit. And then we see some other detail renderings here. We're going to come down. These are also, again, all Fusion 360 renderings of the different light modes, and then created into GIFs with Photoshop. We'll also touch on this a little bit later. So this is what we kind of call like a context rendering of, hey, here's my product in its actual use case. So whoever's going to look at this gets a really good feel for what your product is going to be like in real life, since these are just concepts now. So let's go ahead and jump back into Fusion 360 and get right into it. So if you have designed your part here and you haven't set any materials, more than likely it's going to look like this, which is totally fine, right? But it's not visually compelling in any way, So let's go ahead and modify that. So from the design workspace, we're going to go into the rendering workspace. Let's check out what we have. So it can be a little bit confusing sometimes for those who haven't used the rendering workspace. What we're seeing here is not a render. This is simply just a preview, so it gets a lot better than what we're seeing here. So let's kind of talk about the UI really quick, and then let's go into applying some materials after that. So working from left to right, the first thing we have is the appearance menu. So let's open that up. So the appearance is just going to change how your product looks. We'll get into that really simply. First though, if I can just drag and drop, you're going to see appearance is going to change how this looks. There's like a polished gold. Let me go ahead and undo that. We'll go into appearances in a second. Scene settings is the next one in line, and this is where you're going to be spending a majority of your time. So this is where you're going to set up what your rendering looks like, the scale, the camera angles and everything. So we're going to do all of that inside of here. So as soon as we set our materials, we're going to come through our scene settings and we'll start setting the render up. There's a couple other things in here. Decal, you're seeing the Autodesk logo applied to this utility knife now. You can texture map some of these renderings. If the scale is off, you need to move it around. All sorts of good stuff in there. Now, in Canvas Render, this is another really, really great tool that we're going to use, and I'll go ahead and click it in a second, and my apologies if the system lags a little bit. This does use your computing power, as opposed to when we're actually rendering, we're going to use the cloud power, so your computer isn't necessarily working at all. But an in-canvas render is something that I like to use to check my settings and the changes that I'm making to the render before I actually click on that render button. So this is just a little preview. So let's go ahead and click it now and see what we get. Well, let's go ahead and it's going to stop there. So what do we have? We have a little bit of a preview here. So what are we seeing? Well, we haven't applied any material, so everything's just kind of blending together. It's not that interesting. The background here is just this like plain gray, and there's not a lot going on, but we're starting to get to a nice product rendering. So let's go ahead and keep working on this. We can also very faintly see a little reflection down here, and that we have added a ground plane. So there's some shadows forming, and shadows are definitely your friend in renderings. So let's stop this in-canvas render, and let's start on these materials, and then we'll move over to our scene settings. So let's open up our appearance library, and let's go ahead and give ourselves something to shoot for. So let me go into the completed file, and let's check out what we have here. Well, I have this speckled texture, which is actually a custom texture, which I'll show you guys at the end how we can make custom textures inside of Fusion. But let's go ahead and just check it out. All right, so we have our, kind of emissive, translucent part here. The base, this could be any color material that you chose. There's a little light feature right here for the battery level. There's a cord and this little, T-shape on the cord to light hang it. There's a solar panel on the top, which is just, kind of represented by a reflective dark surface. And that's basically it. There's not a ton of materials to this, so let's go ahead and set them up. All right. I'm going to open my appearances library and let's check out how we can navigate this. So if you have a brand new file, more than likely you're just going to have this like one satin steel right here. You're not going to have all these. So let's go ahead and scroll down and we're going to see this Fusion 360 Appearances tab. This will default open, and then what do we have in here? Well, these are all of the default materials that you can work with inside of Fusion 360. So let's say, I was going to machine this base out of metal. I'd go to metal, maybe I'd machine it up aluminum, and let's say it's going to be anodized in a glossy red. So all I have to do is drag and drop. Now note, if I take this blue, I can also, if I open up my bodies tab over here, I could drag and drop to my bodies over here as well, which can be very, very helpful. So we can see that automatically changes, and right away, we've changed one material. It took a couple seconds and it's already totally changing the feel of our products. Let's keep going. Now, I'm going to touch on this in a second. I'm going to go into my favorites, and I've saved a couple of these speckled materials. So if we go back to my Instructable, I was really inspired by this speckled kind of plastic texture that we have going on here. I wanted to incorporate something similar to that in mind in my project. So what I ended up coming up with, if I go back into Fusion, let's take green, for example. So let's just drag and drop our green. So this is what I ended up coming up with. So it's more of like a triangular speckle at a bit of a larger scale. And, I really liked how this came out. Now, this is a custom texture. I'll touch on this really, really quick. So inside of Adobe Illustrator, I've created a rectangle here and, added all these little shapes and stuff and colored them appropriately. And this is actually what I export as an image, a JPEG, a PNG, and then you can actually import those inside of Fusion 360 to use as materials. Now we're looking at the green one here. I can drag the brown one over, dark gray, orange. There's all sorts of really endless possibilities. Now, I did actually modify a silicone and added this pattern to it. I found that inside of Fusion, rendering with the light source, the environment that I liked, silicone was giving me this matte, very smooth surface finish that I was after. So I decided that silicone was the best starting point. Now, some of the matte plastics were also giving me very, very similar results, and I definitely could have gone with those. But remember, these appearances are just how your product is going to look in the render, where we haven't actually modified the physical material of this yet. So let's stick with our green speckle and let's also apply it to this here. Now, what else do we have? Well, we have this base here. Now, this is where our light is going to shine through. If I go back to my Fusion 360 appearances, let me go ahead and search for silicone. And again, in real life, this is not going to be made out of silicone, but this is giving me the visual look that I'm after. So this is what I decided to go with. Now, a couple more things. Well, we have this, solar panel on top, which this could be another good example of where you could kind of go down the deep end of making a custom texture that looks just like a solar panel. For the purposes of my rendering, I was really just after a reflective surface that was kind of a dark color. So I tried glass, but it was a little bit too see-through. They have some really dark colored glass in here. So I actually ended up going with was we have a nice black chrome. And if I drag and drop that on, this is giving us kind of that solar panel-y, dark reflection. We're not seeing any of our lines in here, but that's okay. So we have a couple more materials to add. Let's do this strap first. So this strap, is just supposed to be an elastic cord that kind of passes through this through hole here. So let's go ahead and find something for that. So if I go into my appearances, let me close up this menu. Let's try fabric. Maybe not what I'm looking for. Leather and cloth. Let's check out cloth. So we have a black fabric here, and that's pretty close. Let's drag and drop that on. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. I might want to lighten it up a little bit. I think we might be losing some of these details. Let's edit a material. So if I double left click on this, we're going to see a little menu come up, and this is where we want. Now we want to go into the advanced menu. And what are we seeing in here? Well, we have an image on top of this. So this is where we could actually edit the image. I don't think we can modify this because our image is actually that dark. So let's check out what else we have. Maybe we can try one of these fabric ones. So let's drag a fabric on top. Okay, so that's the same image. Let's see. Yep, and it looks like we won't be able to edit this one either. So we're starting from an image here, and that's what you're seeing pattern across. So let's just stick with that black fabric for now. Let's see how our renderings come out, and maybe we can modify that. So, what's left? Well, let me rotate around here, and I want to be able to see this face a little bit better. If we go back to our home, we can see that this is dark right now because our light source is coming from this side and casting a shadow. So if I go to my scene settings real quick, and we're going to dive into this in a second, let me go ahead and change my position, and I'm going to rotate it around. So now this face is nice and bright. So we have a couple other things here that are still the default material. The first one right here is this charger cover, which is just going to be this matching green speckled texture. If I turn this off for a second too, we can see there is actually a charger behind that, with all of its textures applied to it. Now here's our last thing. So we have our battery level indicator here, which I just decided was going to be a 4-part LED. And it would show you how full or not that your battery is. So I wanted it to be very seamless. Let's go ahead and find something on that. Now I did actually modify a custom material for my battery level. So let's go quarter, half, let's go to a 3/4 battery. Now this last one I'm just going to use a frosted glass. I found this was giving me the visual results that I wanted in my renders. If we go back to our instructor really quick, we can see that this is what I'm modifying right now. So as you click the power button, it's going to let you know how full the battery is on your lantern. Let's get back into Fusion. So, all right, so it's looking like all of our materials were set. That's pretty fast. Now let's go ahead and do another really quick baseline in-canvas render. If I just go ahead and set this to like a 3/4 kind of isometric view, let's go ahead and do an in-canvas render, let it go for a second and pause it and see what we have versus what we started with. If you'll notice, there's a little progress bar down here at the bottom. I'll usually just let it get to excellent, and then go ahead and it'll automatically stop. If you want it a little clearer, if you're really looking for some fine detail, you can let it go. But this is just a little progress bar for you. So what do we have? Well, this is already so much more visually compelling because we've gotten rid of that default steel material and we replaced it with all of these materials here. So now this is good, but my background is just so bland. And it's really not giving me any results that I want. So let's stop that in-canvas render. And now let's go ahead and jump into our scene settings. And again, let's give ourselves a goal. So if I come back into this, why don't we go ahead and set up this render that we're looking at here. Now this is 3 separate renders. If we jump into InDesign really quick, this is another Adobe product. I actually took these 3 renders and go ahead and made one kind of long image out of them. Now you can see they're a much bigger image, and I just kind of cropped them to get this one here. So let's go back into Fusion. So why don't we set that one up? And if I scroll back my timeline here, I can actually show you my progress, the steps that I took to get to this render, because I didn't really know what I wanted it to look like. I was just kind of playing around and seeing what was visually compelling to me. So if we zoom out really quick, we can also actually see that I've created a wall to give myself an extra shadow. So let's look at the process that I went through really quick. So I started with this one, which is kind of what we're going to do in a second. And I wanted to have a shot from the front. I wanted it to kind of be floating. I didn't want it to be, you know, on a ground plane at all. But this just wasn't doing it for me. There's no shadows. There's no depth to this. You know, I'm losing the chord. It just looks like that there's no depth to anything. There's not a ton of contrast outside of, you know, this big light source here, which is actually not on, by the way. We'll go over light sources a little bit later. I'll show you an example at least. So this was okay. It was a good start, but it wasn't at all what I was after. Now we'll notice in our rendering gallery down here too, some of these have a little number up in the top right. And that's essentially, hey, I've taken X amount of renders. So in this case, I've taken 10 renders from the same exact camera angle, and it just organizes them into a folder for you. So let's open up this one for a second that has 10. And now we can go through and see what I was experimenting with. So I had a couple other colors, a teal and an orange, that I didn't actually end up using, but wanted to play around with and see. But these are a lot different from what we started with here. So let's go ahead and check out these for a second in this folder. So if I open up this teal one, again, it's not very interesting. There's not a ton of shadows here. You know, I'm totally losing the shape in this front face. If I go to this orange one, you know, there's a weird, you know, thing kind of happening right here. I can tell the light is already like way too bright, so I need to dull that down. Again, I'm losing the depth and definition in my elastic chord, and I have no idea what shape this is because I can just very faintly see a line down right there. So I need to play around with this. After that, what I decided to do, if we open up one of these, was go ahead and add a wall behind it. Now, adding this wall gave me this really interesting shadow right here. And the other thing that I did was I changed the direction of my light source so that this face right here is just darkened a little bit because my light source isn't, you know, before it was straight on. And that is just not giving us some really interesting results. So now I've added a shadow, and you can kind of tell that this is sitting in front of a wall. So it's already much more visually compelling. After that, I ended up on these final revisions, which let's go ahead and just open this brown one up right here and we can scroll through. So compared to what we started with, this is so much better in the sense that I have more definition in the strap. I have definition in this front face and some contrast with this shadow. I have a background shadow and a background plane that you can kind of clearly see. So this is what I was after right here, and this is why I ended up, exporting. Let's go ahead and take a peek down here at this orange one. Again, much more compelling shadows, contrast, it's all there. Definitely could be improved 100%, but for what I was after, this was good enough for me. Let's go ahead and remind us kind of what we started with. And again, no shadows, no background. You're losing all sorts of kind of little features. There's a weird shading thing happening here. So we had to fix all that up. So let's go ahead and get this file together. So let's go back to ours, and we're going to work with this green. So what can we start off with? Well, let's open up our scene settings and check out some of the stuff in here. So we have this brightness slider here. Now 9 times out of 10 you can usually leave this where it's at. Now I did notice for this project, actually I really liked when it was set at 1500. I think it captured a lot more of the small details that we lose. So I'm going to bump that up just a hair. I think 2000 is probably the brightest that I go, and maybe 800 would be the darkest, and that all is going to vary depending on what you're going after in your render. The next thing we have is this position crosshair, and if we go, we're going to get this slider, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to show you where your light source is coming from, and this is going to change with every environment that we choose to work with. So it will default, I believe, to sharp highlights, which is I think what I have set here, and this is just going to change where it's coming from. Now we have an actual background here, and it's going to say solid color or environment. So if I rotate around, you can see there's just a solid color infinite background here, and that's fine. That's actually what I use for a majority of mine. But if we go to environment, we can see now we have this kind of scene that's around us here, and this is where our light is coming from. And if we go over to this environment library tab, that's where these are coming from. So let's go ahead and do one of the more drastic ones, like this dry lake bed. So I'm just going to click and drag, and now we can see our lantern is out in the middle of a dry lake bed, which I guess might happen. It's not a render that I was after, so I'm just going to go ahead and go back, scroll through, and explore with some of these too. Figure out which environments you like, which give you cool renders. I'm just going to stick with sharp highlights. It's one of the ones that I use a lot. I'll go back to my settings, and I'm going to change this back to a solid color. Now we have some other things here, a ground. So right now all these are checked, meaning I have a ground plane. So if we uncheck that, you can see now it's just kind of floating in space. We can put a ground plane. Flattened ground is handy when you're using these environments not in a solid color. And reflections, if we zoom out here really quick, you can see there's actually a reflection against the ground that will show up in your render. So again, it's all out, what do you want out of this render? Do you want a nice reflection? Just play around with all these settings, and this roughness slider is just for your reflection to decide how clear or how rough it's going to look. Now, if you're familiar with photography at all, you can play around with what your camera looks like, the different focal length, depth of field if you want some cool, up close shots that are in focus. And the aspect ratio. Now, this is a really, really great part of Fusion that everybody that's new to rendering definitely needs to know. So right now it says viewport aspect ratio. So what does that mean? Well, right now, let's say I go to render this shot that we're looking at, this kind of 3/4 shot. It's going to render this entire gray area that we're looking at here, and that's so much wasted space. Now, in the case of, for example, these renders, I did render out a lot of extra space because I had a feeling I was going to put this kind of graphic together. But let's go ahead, open up our scene settings again, and let's change that from viewport aspect ratio to a 1:1 square. Now we can see it's only going to render out what we have inside here, and everything that's grayed out to the sides, it's not going to render. So that's awesome. It's going to make the quality of our image better, and you're not going to distract your viewers with all this dead space. It's going to be just what they need to see. There's also, if you get too far down the wrong path and you just want to have a fresh slate, you can just restore your defaults here, and that'll just bring you to a default configuration. All right, so we're almost set up here, but what else do we need? Well, we have this background color. Now, I could go ahead and just set this, let's just find a close kind of green, maybe a little darker. I could just set this kind of close, and this is actually what I started out with. If we come back to this file, this is what I started out with. I just set a green background that was, pretty close to this color here and went for that. And that was a good start. But again, if we come back to here, this is what we're going to go after. This is much, much more compelling. So a little pro tip to rendering is never be afraid to actually give yourself some context or some props to work with. Now, this could be a table. I could render this out on a table like we see here. You could do all sorts of different things. So I'm going to give myself a wall behind this. Let's head back into our design workspace. I'm also going to save my file really quick. And let's go ahead and open up my browser again, and let's give myself a wall behind this, and I'm going to put it on this backside here. So I'll create a sketch. Just going to grab my default plane right there, and I'm just going to make a big wall, and let's extrude this, just some arbitrary value. How about an inch? And let's make sure we're making a new body. Okay. So the only thing left to do is let's go ahead and move this back a little bit. Now I want to keep it close enough to my product that I'm getting good shadows. Too far away and you're going to lose some of the definition and shadows that you're getting, and too close and they might be a little bit too aggressive. So we might just have to play around with this a little bit. But I think that's a good start. So now what's left? So let's go back into our render workspace, and this is good, but it's still a default material. So let's go ahead and set a material for it. Now I did a silicone material for this wall. And what I went ahead and did, if we open up our appearance library, is I took a default silicone. So let's go ahead and grab one. And make sure I already have one. Okay, so I do already have this orange one. The last one I was messing with was an orange background. So this is just the silicone material that I've modified to orange. So now let's just double click on it and let's change it to a nice dark green, and that's close enough. All right, so now if we go back into our front view, we can kind of zoom in and start to set this up. Now, another really important tool is to know the difference between perspective and orthographic view. So if we go into orthographic, check it out. So now we don't have any of that perspective distortion, and this might be something handy for you, but for purposes of my product, I want some of that distortion, some of that reality from a nice perspective view. So I'm just going to frame it up something like this. The next thing that I want to do is I want to be able to save this camera angle. Now that's something that you can't do inside of Fusion 360, but there's a little hack that I like to use, and that's by saving a home. So if I come into here, you'll see set current view as home, and we're going to go to fixed distance. I'll click on that. Now, anytime I rotate out, I can go do stuff, and if I just click my home button, it's going to bring me right back to where I was. Now, this is really helpful when you want to recreate a handful of renderings. So, what do we have? Let's go ahead and do another quick in-canvas render, let it run for a second, and compare to what we started with. I'm just going to pause it there and let's see what we have. So already we can see we have a shadow on this side of our piece now. That's good. There's, you know, this face is nice and lit up. This is getting some contrast, a little bit darker. We can see everything is starting to turn out pretty nice. So let's go ahead and go back and maybe let's say, let's go ahead and change the direction that our light source is coming from. Let's say something like that would probably be nice. I can get rid of my ground plane as well, and I'm going to leave all these as they are. Let's go back to our home. Let's do another quick in-canvas render and see what we have. And I'll pause it there again. This is really all I need to see. So I'm getting my shadow in the right side that I want it, and I think this is going to come out really well. Now, it might be a little bit too dark. I might have to lighten things up a bit, but as far as just a quick preview, this is what I'm after. So let's say you have your material set and you're ready to go render. How do you do it? Well, go ahead and click on this little teapot up here. And now we're going to start with our settings. Now, if you have the proper Fusion 360 education license and you're a student, all of these renderings will be completely free to you because you have unlimited credits. So don't worry about this here. Now we can see we have a pretty low pixel count. Let's bump that up. Let's maybe just do 1000 by 1000 pixels. It's going to be a cloud render versus a local render. So a cloud render, it's going to use, it's going to go up to the cloud, use all that cool computing power, and then come right back down to you. So the advantages of this is that you're not using your computer's power at all, which means you can keep working on all of your files. You can even close down Fusion 360 and shut your computer off, and this render is still going to be working in the cloud for however long it's going to take. We can see this one would take about 10 minutes. So I really like that feature, and this also allows you to send off multiple renders at a time, so you're not losing any productivity. And we also want to make sure our render quality is on final. Now there's other settings in here, you know, if you know that, you want to print this out at 5x7 inch at 300 ppi, then you can set that here. You know, if you're going to print this on a piece of paper, there you go. But we're going to go ahead and just leave it on this custom 1000 by 1000 square. And let's go ahead and click on render. It's going to save our document. And then it's going to go ahead and send this off to the cloud. So you can see it says that it was submitted a few seconds ago. If we remember, it said it estimated it would take less than 10 minutes. And it's 1000 by 1000 pixels, and it's a final render quality, which is what we want. So we've completely set up a render from a file that was just default materials and nothing else. So let's go ahead and check out a couple other things that we have in this file really quick, and then let's talk about some of these other tools while we're waiting for that to come back. So you see all sorts of different renders that I did in here. This is a good one to talk about really quick. So this is another example of, I've been using the rendering workspace in Fusion 360 for a while, but it's all about experimentation no matter how much you know. So if I open this one up here, I wanted to get a good rendering of this charger port behind the little cover on it. And this first one that I took, my materials were way off because I cannot tell what this is at all. I might be able to make out that it's a charger port, but honestly, I don't think many people who are looking at this will say, oh, duh. I have a little lightning bolt here even, but the materials were way too reflective, actually, I found. So it was getting really dark. So I changed up my materials and took another render, and this was starting to go in the right direction, but you can see the edge finish on this material was not what I wanted. I think that was like a bead blasted aluminum, so it's not going to be a nice smooth surface finish. I ended up trying, I believe this was just like a satin aluminum, and it came out really good in the sense that it was nice and bright. You can tell what it is. And it also, keeps those realistic metal reflections. So just because your first render isn't necessarily coming out how you want it, don't give up hope. You're learning every time you go do a render, and that's going to allow you to get to some really cool results. We can also look at, for example, my renders of the battery level indicator here. It was all taken from the same camera angle. All I did was adjust the materials. Now, what else do we have? Of course, my lantern project is, based on something that lights up. So Fusion also has some luminous materials that you can modify. For example, the lantern has a solid red flashing mode, or a solid red and an SOS flashing with this red LED. So I can kind of show that a little bit. Here's the high and the low, this kind of warmer white LED as well. So you have lots and lots of opportunity inside of Fusion. Now we can see another little kind of tip here. These will open for me. It looks like they won't. But I actually modeled a table. If we go to this render here, I modeled this table by hand and then just added this background in the back after the fact in Photoshop. I modeled the table and added the textures and everything because I wanted to capture this reflection of the light off that. And if I purely just, Photoshop my lantern in, I was going to lose that reflection of it actually being on. Now, of course, I'm losing lots of definition right here because we're using a bulb. Think about when you look at a light bulb, you can't actually see any of the curves that you do anymore. So this is a bit of a tough render. But I think it came out all right. Here's another example of a context render. Now I just rendered this out as transparent, and I'll show you how to do that in a second inside of Fusion, and then I just photoshopped it onto this tent here as if it was hanging. Let's check our file and see what we have. Great, so this one's already done, so let's go ahead and click on it and see what you have. Well, I do think it is a little bit dark. But I think this is great progress, right? So it's a bit dark. I think the materials, the overall scene is kind of dark. Let's go back to our settings. I think we do have this. Okay, so our brightness is on 1000, so let's bump that up to 1500. Now let's go ahead, take another quick test render, and I think that's going to give us the results that we want. So let's send off another render and we'll check back on this one. Now in the meantime, let's work with this one a little bit. And so let's say that this is exactly what you want. You're going to download this one. Awesome. So it's a little download button right here, and you have 4 options. Now, if you want a transparent background, it's automatically going to crop this out. Now, note that we did build a physical wall behind this. So if I wanted a transparent background, it's not essentially going to work. I would have to turn that wall off and then render it out again. But if I did that, for example, I clicked on transparent background and took it as a PNG, I could go ahead and it's just going to automatically cut this out, which is really, really nice. You don't have to go in Photoshop and actually manually cut that out. So I would just click on whichever style of image I wanted and just save it onto my computer locally. So we have another render going. Now let's kind of burn some time while we're waiting for that one. So we've gone over everything of how to show these. Now let's go into InDesign. So this is an example, really quick one, of how you can use other software to kind of make your renders more compelling. Now I could have just linked all 3 of these images individually, but maybe I can put them together and it's more of an interesting kind of product showcase. If I go into Photoshop, this is how I made my GIFs and did all sorts of other stuff. So here's an example of a GIF, which is super easy to create in here. I wanted to show the user that this is how the light modes, would theoretically look or work. So I came into here and did that. If we go back into my project, we can see this one here is actually going to show you the SOS mode. Now, as somebody who likes to hike and go four-wheeling in the backcountry, this was a really important feature that it had this kind of SOS mode in case things really went south. So that is most of what we have inside of our rendering. So let's go ahead and go over really quickly of how you can make a custom material. And we're just really going to touch the surface on this. Making a custom material from scratch and having your own bump patterns and all sorts of stuff could be an entire workshop in itself. But let's say you just want to add a pattern to something. So let me open up my appearance library. And why don't we go ahead and modify this white silicone down here, and we'll add a speckled texture to it. So let me go into my appearances. Let me find just my white silicone, which is right here, the default material. I'll double click on this. Let's go into our advanced settings. Now note, if I just wanted to change the color, well, I can do that right here. You can slide this all around and change the color here. So it's really, really easy to modify these materials. But let's go ahead and go into advanced and let's see some of our advanced options. It's giving us a little preview, and what we want is right here under these parameters. We can see it's under this RGB value, and there's some reflectance and roughness stuff here. We don't really need to touch that because it's already set the way I like it. I chose this silicone because I like how it's rendering out with my environment, so I'm going to leave those as is. But instead of having just a color here, which we can just modify to whatever we want, this little drop down flag is going to let you add an image. So let's click on that. Now let's go ahead and find one of these textures that I made. And why don't we just grab this teal one? So let me double click on this. Now you can see that, okay, it's applied that image. And what else can we do? So let's go ahead and just apply that and check out what we have. Well, cool. So it's definitely started to work, but the scale is definitely off. So let's double click on it again. We can just take the scale down maybe to something like that. Now, of course, this isn't how it's going to look in real life, but just an example, all these textures, you can just go ahead and double click, go to your advanced options and change it from a color to an image and do some cool stuff. So that's a very, very brief way. There's, of course, 3D textures that are actually going to have, grooves in them like that. We go back, like this wood tabletop actually has like physical grooves in it with bump patterns and stuff. Again, if you're really curious about making textures from scratch, go ahead and check out YouTube. There's lots of tutorials on that really dive into, going into Photoshop and building all of these from nothing. So it looks like this one is actually getting ready to finish up in a second. Let's go ahead and go back to our silicone. I'm going to go ahead and just change this back to my color, and let's change it to white. I'll apply it and cancel out of that. And this is great. So that's the gist of setting up a render. If we go back to this file again, what else did I do here? So I've set up all sorts of different ones on a table. This is the one that I set up for it hanging inside of the tent. I just kind of, took a little 3/4 view, or just like a view from under it. We could keep looking through. We have some of the straps and the battery level. Now let's talk really quickly. Let's go to one of my other Instructables projects. Let's talk about context and adding context and where you can get stuff. So as this one is loading up here, a great place that you can get free open source CAD files for is GrabCAD. So if you go to community and we'll go down to the library, this is an awesome place that you can grab 3D files for free that you can use in your rendering. So even stuff like cars and, this guy made a bunch of bolts that you could use, little casters for office chairs. There's all sorts of stuff that you can grab in here. And for some reason, this is not loading right now. Well, we'll give that a second. So, scroll around on here. For example, the one I'm trying to open is a desk that I designed. And I said, well, what goes on a desk? Maybe somebody has a pair of headphones. So you can just go ahead and search for headphones, and cool. All these came up. You can even search for ones. If we go by software, you can even look for ones that were created inside of Fusion 360. That way, when you open them up, all your textures are going to be there. Even somebody made some generative design headphones right here. So you check out GrabCAD. Yeah, it still isn't opening. Bummer. For example, another good one would be a book. So you can summon here, okay, so somebody made an entire bookshelf. Let's get rid of the software because Fusion can open mainly any software that you want. So let's go search for book again here. What else could we do? Let's do pen. You know, we had a pen cup and I needed some pens to put in there and I just didn't want to model them and there's no reason to. So maybe here's a cool one over here with this pen. All you have to do is click in and go ahead and check out the folder and download the files. Now you do have to create an account. It's completely free, and GrabCAD is definitely a resource that you can also post your files to as well. Let's say you've designed something and you're not going to do anything with it and you want to put it out on the internet so other people can use it in their 3D CAD files. You can post them on here, which is really, really cool. You know, if you're going to use a library, you may as well add some files to it. So let's go back to Fusion. Let's check out this other file and compare our renderings here. So let's open up the folder. Aha, so this is much brighter if we pan between these two. Now we're getting some more of our details. I would almost say it could even be a little bit brighter than what we're seeing here, just to say we're not losing all those details. But this green also is very dark, and we have a couple of very dark colors with this really bright color here. So overall, I think that's really awesome for the such short amount of time that we put into creating a rendering. And just remember what we started from, right? We started from a big gray window with some weird looking steel lantern, and that's just not visually compelling at all. There's no contrast. So that is everything that I have to cover on rendering inside of Fusion 360, and there's at least the basics to get you started. Of course, if you are on our Discord or you're watching this on YouTube later, you can reach out to myself or any of the other Autodesk student ambassadors for help with your renderings if you want to create a specific material, or if you just need to kind of be walked through how you would set up a rendering or even some of this Photoshop work. You know, making GIFs, making custom textures, you know, kind of combining some images together. Just reach out to us on our Fusion 360 Students Discord server and we'll help you out. Yeah. So thank you for everybody for watching this, and we hope to talk to you soon.